Well, here we are again. Corona strikes back, and now we have to shut down for at least 2 weeks. Brutal, but you know, hopefully it'll go fast. Hopefully we'll be able to come back together soon. Thanks for joining us. Welcome. My name is Pastor Josh. I'm the youth pastor, and it's a bummer. Man, we had such a great week last week, and now we have to shut down again. So 2 weeks tonight, next Wednesday, we're off completely next week because of Thanksgiving. The week after that, we'll see what we can do. If the quarantine continues, we may try some small group stuff or something like that. But hang in there, be encouraged. God is on the throne. He's going to get us through. Hopefully, we're coming to the end of this disaster of a year. But I'm excited. There's so many good things going on with our youth group. We just had our auction this last Sunday, and in the midst of a quarantine where most of the stuff that we normally sell to raise money we couldn't use, we made over $2,000. So that's awesome. Big round of applause for that. The church has been so generous to us, and that will go to those of you who need financial help, or maybe you have siblings and you all go to events together, so you need some help paying for that. Your parents are going to be excited about how much we made, and I'm excited. I can't believe how well it went. Thank you to everybody who helped out. Thank you to all of you whose parents donated or contributed in different ways. Just awesome. I'm so encouraged. Our next event coming up is going to be the Progressive Dinner. Maybe, we're planning it. We're hoping to make it work. We're going to do it a little differently this year so that we can do it in small groups and social distance. But we'll see. We'll plan it as if it's happening. And if we can do it, we will do it. That's going to be on December 4th. Be sure to mark that on your calendar. December 4th, it's a free event. We will probably have a sign up available soon, but it's one of the highlights of the holiday season for a lot of you. We love doing the Progressive Dinner. There will be a white elephant, and so bring a white elephant gift. I think the limit is $15 or something like that. As we go through this material and go through this lesson, always encourage you to take notes, get a notepad, write down things that stand out to you, verses, things you can go back and look over and pray over. It always helps cement it in your mind. So let's go ahead and pray, and then we're going to jump into our final lesson about God, our series, God Unfiltered. So, Father, we thank you for this series. We thank you. I just thank you for how much you've taught me about yourself and about how extraordinary you are and how unpredictable and how just amazing it is to follow you. God, I pray that you would tune in our hearts, no matter what we're doing, no matter what we're thinking about or working on or wondering about, God, that we would take this time to just be with you and sit with you and learn at your feet. God, speak through me. Let it be your words and your wisdom and your word, because that is what changes our lives, God. Certainly not my wisdom. And I just ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. So as I said, we're closing up our series, God Unfiltered, and this series has been all about taking off the blinders that we have that affect the way we see God and being able to see him more clearly, to be able to see God for who he really is. God Unfiltered. And tonight, I want to start out with a story. So many of you know that when I was a senior in college, I had a pastor who is a friend of mine, and he just challenged me. He was listening to my story, and he challenged me and said, Josh, your world is too small. Now, I loved my world. I loved growing up in Vancouver, Washington. I love my friends, my community, everything that I had built there up until that point. But I took his challenge seriously, and so I put my resume online and just thought, I'm just going to move somewhere. And I didn't necessarily want to move, but I wanted my world to get bigger. So to make a long story short, there were a bunch of churches that were interested in hiring me, but I ended up at a church in Detroit, Michigan. I didn't know hardly anything about Michigan except for some of their sports teams, but I took a job in Detroit, Michigan. And I actually asked a buddy if he wanted to come with me and move to Michigan, just go on this adventure together. And he I actually asked him halfway jokingly, and he said yes eventually. And I'm like, oh my goodness. So we went off on this together, and I sold my car. We decided to just take his car, and his car was a Geo Metro. Now, I don't know if you know anything about Geo Metro, but the whole car is like the size of my office desk, right? And my office desk is not very big. You could sit in the front seat and touch all the windows in the car. If you open the hood and look at the engine, it's about the size of a loaf of bread. So we packed everything that we wanted to take with us. We bought like this car backpack thing on top that the poor Metro was falling under. And we set out to cross the country and move to Michigan. And man, what a trip it was. Trying to get over the Rocky Mountains in this little Geo Metro. I mean, there were times when we're going like 20 miles an hour, like, just come on, you can do it, push. And of course, the two of us, you know, we're young 20 somethings. We're just having a good time going on a road trip across the country, having like farting contests and things like that. Now, I'm not going to say who did this to who, but one of us actually farted on a pillow and then stuck the pillow in the person driving's face, which I wouldn't recommend for a couple of reasons. One of them is it was so bad it threw off whoever was driving's concentration. Secondly, it's hard to drive with a pillow in your face. So those of you who are new drivers, don't do that. It was a bad idea, but man, it was a fun trip. And for those of you who have moved away from home or moved multiple times in your life, you know that it's a challenging experience. It's a heart-wrenching thing to move away from where you've settled. My mom had a going away party for us, and at this going away party, she asked people to write us letters, right? So I had this whole book that she compiled of letters people wrote to me, and as we're driving along in that Geo Metro, I remember flipping through these letters, and it just hit me. I mean, I start like crying over these things, and it's just gut-wrenching and heart-wrenching, because home is so important, right? It's the place where you've built a place to be, where you've built relationship, where you've worked to make it feel like home. It's one of those deep soul level desires that we have to have a place that feels familiar, that we wrap our lives around, a place that feels like home. But can I just confess something to you? If I'm honest, thinking back on my life and all the different places I've lived, I've never felt completely satisfied or completely at home anywhere. Now, that's a really weird thing to say. It's actually kind of ridiculous in my case, because I have an amazing family. I have 9 younger siblings, and they're all extraordinary people. I love them all deeply. I've had a good job since I was 13. I had a great opportunity for education, got my master's degree in leadership. And I've lived in wonderful places. I grew up on a house out in the woods and a farm where I used to camp out back with my friends, where we used to go fishing in the creeks, and where we used to play with the dogs. It just could not have been a more peaceful upbringing. And now as an adult, I have a beautiful, accomplished wife. I have a brilliant son. It's like I have so many things to be thankful for. And you would think that with a life that God has given me, I would feel perfectly at home. And yet I'll tell you, something inside me has always felt like I was missing something that I really needed, like a restlessness or an emptiness or something that made everything feel not quite like home. The author C.S. Lewis, if you've never heard of him, he wrote Chronicles of Narnia, and the Narnia movies are based on his stuff. Some of the most incredible books ever written by C.S. Lewis. And he says it this way: if we find ourselves with a desire that nothing in the world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that we were made for another world. Isn't that interesting? I mean, that's kind of this crazy idea of like another world. Like, what does that mean? Another world. But at the same time, I suspect that you felt it too, that you've had this deep longing for satisfaction and fulfillment and rest that you never actually experienced, even if you grew up in a healthy, peaceful home. I mean, during the quarantine, we've spent more time with family, which is great. And we've spent more time reflecting and more time at home and more time simplifying our lives. And in the midst of all this, if you're like me, you still feel restless, right? You still feel like something's missing. What if we could ask God why we feel this way and get an unfiltered answer from him? In John 14, Jesus and his disciples have a conversation about this very thing. So let's look at this passage. John 14, starting at verse 1. Just going to give you a minute. If you have your Bible, you can look it up on your phone or grab your Bible and read along with me. I'm going to be reading from the New Living Translation, almost always do. Some other great translations, but I like to teach from NLT. And Jesus says this, John 14:1. Don't let your hearts be troubled. Trust in God and trust also in me. Now, Jesus is one with God. It's one of those weird concepts that's really hard to wrap your mind around. I actually included a video YouTube link in the description of this lesson, and it's a Bible Project video that kind of dives into what it means that Jesus and God are the same. It's really like, it'll mess with your head, but I love the way they explained it. So take some time to watch that video, but Jesus and God are one. They are unified. So everything Jesus says and everything Jesus does is a perfect reflection of God's heart. The life of Jesus is the unfiltered picture of God. And he knows people's hearts. And he knows that our hearts tend to get anxious and troubled. And so he's saying, as your heart goes to get anxious and troubled, don't let it happen. Now, what are we supposed to do about that, right? I mean, have you ever had this experience where like you were angry at something and your parents are just like, don't be angry at that. And you're like, well, that's not helpful. I'm still angry, right? It didn't do anything. Or, you feel anxious or afraid and somebody's like, well, you shouldn't be afraid of that. You're like, I don't know what to tell you. I still am. Come on. And so Jesus is saying, don't let your heart be troubled. Don't let it happen. Like, how do we do that? How do we make that work? So Jesus develops it some more. He says this in verse 2. There is more than enough room in my Father's home. If this were not so, I would have told you. But I am going to prepare a place for you. When everything's ready, I'll come and get you, so you will always be with me where I am. Now, Jesus is talking about eternity. He's talking about a place in heaven with him as our true home. Something that I've wondered throughout my life as I've gone different places and been around different people is if our perspective of heaven and what we see as the most important thing in heaven is a reflection of what we value as a culture and as a community of people. So just think about this. When you've heard about heaven in America, what sort of things do you hear? What sort of things are emphasized? And in my life, the things that I've heard emphasized are mansions, big houses, streets of gold, wealth and prosperity. That's what heaven is, right? It's interesting because that's a reflection of what we value. And Jesus is not talking about that at all. He's not telling us to get excited about big mansions and wealth and prosperity. He's talking about a place that is truly our home that he's preparing for us. A place where the longing of our heart and the unsettled desire of our heart is finally satisfied. Augustine put it this way: our hearts are restless until we find rest in you. Our hearts will be restless until we find rest in you. He's saying that that longing for a home in your heart, that's a longing for me. And you can trust me to get you there. Now, at this point in the conversation, something amazing happens. All right. So Jesus says in verse 4, and you know the way to where I'm going. Then one of his disciples, Thomas, chimes in. And Thomas is the same one that doubted that Jesus had come back to life after he died. He kind of gets this reputation as doubting Thomas, but he speaks up and he's being super real. And I love how honest he is. He says, no, we don't know where you're going, Lord. Thomas said, we have no idea where you're going. How can you say that we know where you're going? I mean, Thomas is saying something along the lines of like, Jesus, you talk in parables, you talk in riddles, you're going all over the place. We can't figure out what you're trying to tell us. I mean, come on, where are you taking us? What's going on? These guys have given up everything to follow Jesus. They have stuck with him when people made fun of them, when people mocked them, even when their lives were in danger. They've given up family, they've given up relationships, they've given up houses and jobs to follow Jesus. When the whole crowd thought what Jesus was saying was silly and ridiculous and totally threw his claims aside, these guys had stuck with him. And he's struggling with, what's in it for me? I mean, he's about to be crucified, right? Like, what's going on? What is the point of following you? What is this place that you keep talking about? Because we haven't seen it and we don't know it and we're still restless. And I love how honest Thomas is. I think this is a critical part of our Christian walk, that being a Christian is about being real about what we're going through. I once was teaching a college group, and there was about 30 college kids. And I asked this question. I just asked them to blurt out, what is your guilty pleasure? You know, and some people said like a food, like, you know, chocolate or a dessert, ice cream. Some people were like, I watch SpongeBob, or I watch Adventure Time, or just these silly, funny things. And we all laughed together. And then this one guy raised his hand and he goes, I'm addicted to drugs. And it was like really quiet, like, oh, okay, well, what do we do with that? And at the same time, like, I loved his honesty. Like, look, I have a problem I need help with, and I just want people to know that I have this thing in my life. See, what we tend to do in church is we learn early on that if we want to be accepted, we have to put on a happy face, that we have to whitewash everything or make everything look clean and nice, in our language and our behavior and our thoughts. And we struggle with stuff. I mean, we have sin, we have doubts, we have anxiety, we have stress. And it creates this condition where we always feel fake when we're at church. And we always feel like we're carrying this burden of guilt because we want people to think that we've got it all figured out when we know that we don't. Can I tell you that your youth pastor does not have it figured out, and that I feel the same way sometimes? Like, I feel this pressure to fake and not be real about the struggles I go through and the doubts I go through and the hard times that I go through with God. And I love Thomas right by Jesus, like sitting there and saying, look, we don't know what to do. We don't, God, like, what are we supposed to do? And I love that, like, it's safe to be like that before Jesus. And I hope that we create a community at our youth group where it's safe to be like that with each other. To say, man, I'm struggling with this. I'm having a hard time. Like, quarantine is killing me. I'm depressed. I'm turning to stuff that I know I shouldn't turn to, and I don't know what to do. And to be able to embrace each other and pray for each other and just love each other through it. So that's what he does. It's a great example of what Christians should do, to be real. He's getting real. He's like, this home sounds great, Jesus, but Where is it? And how do we get there? What are we supposed to do? And then Jesus says this. It's a famous verse. If you've been to church for a long time, you probably heard it before. But verse 6, Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And nobody can come to the Father except through me. Now, I could spend a whole nother series talking about just what's underneath these words. It's just incredible. They're so deep and so profound. But just along with what we're talking about, Jesus is addressing this longing for a home by saying, I am the way home. I am the true home. I am the place where you will find life. Just think about that for a minute. The only place that is truly home for our hearts is in Jesus. What makes heaven heaven is being with Jesus without sin getting in the way. That's more important than everything else, because he is that home that we're looking for. You know what else that means? As you get older, you may have already felt this way, but you're going to be tempted to walk away from God. You know, some of you don't realize how much your faith is based on your parents' faith, and your parents drag you to church, and your parents make it a priority for you to hear messages about God. And so there's so much of the structure your parents have put around you. And some of you are going to get outside that structure, and you're going to be tempted to walk away from God. You're going to be tempted to walk away from a faith community. But listen, if you do that, if you walk away from God, you will reject your only hope of finding a true home. There is no other home the world has to offer like Jesus. That's what he's saying. So here's another way of thinking about it. What if life is like flying in an airplane? We're flying in this airplane together called life. And this airplane is going to crash. Right? Because we're going to die. Someday we're going to die. We all will. It happens to everyone. And so Jesus comes along and gives us this promise, right? This promise of a home, and it's like a parachute. It's a parachute that promises a safe landing no matter what happens on this flight. Now, I want to give you this as an example. This is a backpack that I just won at the auction. I outbid a couple people for it, and thank you for the family who donated it. I'm excited about this backpack. It's a cooler that keeps stuff cool for like 100 years. It's amazing, but it kind of looks like a parachute. So pretend this is a parachute and you're on a plane and this plane is going to crash. And so you're holding tightly to this parachute, this promise that God is going to take you home. I heard a joke about a plane that had a pilot and a pastor, an older pastor, and a Boy Scout, and the smartest man in the world. And one of the engines blows on the plane, and it starts going for a crash landing, and the pilot comes back, and he says, listen, I got terrible news. We're going to crash in just a couple minutes, and there's only 3 parachutes. We only have 3 parachutes left. So I'm going to take one. I got a wife and kids at home. He grabs a parachute, buckles it up, and jumps out the window. And then the smartest man in the world says, listen, you two, the world needs more people like me. I solve problems. I invent stuff. I do all these things for the betterment of mankind. I'm the smartest man in the world. I need a parachute. So he grabs one, buckles it up, and jumps off. And then the old pastor says, listen, son, I've lived a long, great life. Like I have, you take the last parachute. I don't need it. You have your whole life ahead of you. And the Boy Scout says, don't worry about it. The smartest man on earth just took my backpack. I hope you get it. It's a good one. But here's my point. That parachute is your lifeline, right? That is your way to a safe landing home. That's Jesus's promise. Now listen, many of you have come to me and talked to me about how hard it is to be a Christian in Central Oregon. You've talked about people bullying you for your faith, or making fun of you, or mocking you, or saying it's ridiculous, or maybe even the last year it's gotten worse, where just for being a Christian, you've been called a racist or a homophobe, and you might love people right where they're at, no matter what their decisions are, or what their background is, or what their race is. And just because you're a Christian, you get associated with all these horrible things and called names. But remember this. If you're sitting on a plane and someday it's going to crash, and Jesus' promise to you is like a parachute that you're holding on to, it's like people on a crashing plane making fun of you for holding a parachute. Think about that for a minute. The ridiculous thing would be to let go of Jesus. You don't have to defend yourself. You don't have to look smart. You certainly don't have to get mean and nasty and shoot back at people. I mean, you can tell them why you love Jesus and why you hold tightly to him, and it may make things worse. But you know what doesn't make sense? What doesn't make sense is to let people bully you into letting go of Jesus, because he's the truth. He is the way out. I was watching Survivor, and I don't care for the show necessarily. And my reasoning is that the few times I've watched it, it seems like the strong, capable people get voted off first. I'm like, Survivor, I thought this was, about people that are strong enough to survive. And the ones that always win are like the kind of sneaky, conniving ones that know how to lie and stuff like that. It just gets me frustrated. But I was watching this one episode, and there were 3 people left. There were 2 girls and a guy. And the guy had won a competition. If you don't know much about the game, there's certain competitions you win, and you can get like a statue or necklace or something like that provides immunity where you can't get voted off. And these girls just started working on him and trying to get him to give his immunity necklace to one of them. And as I'm watching this, I'm like, come on, guy. Like, there's 2 of them, one of you, whatever it takes, you hold on to that necklace, right? They're after you. And they talked to him, and they schmoozed him, and they gave him all these reasons why he should give up his necklace and give it to one of them. And finally he did. Like, he gave it up and gave it to one of the girls. And of course they lost the next competition, and the 2 girls voted him off, and he was done. He was done. He had it made. And we do the same thing. It's like we're holding on to this hope in Jesus. That's our home. That's the only hope for our soul to be satisfied someday. Don't let people cause you to let go. Don't let people discourage you. Life can be brutal. The plane ride can be filled with bumps. It can be filled with storms and lightning, and you can look out the window and an engine explodes, and you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know how your life is going to turn out. But man, if you have that parachute, if you have that promise of Jesus as your true home, you have nothing to be afraid of. Nothing can happen to the plane because you have an escape. You have an ultimate place of rest and safety. So hold tightly to him, no matter what happens, no matter what you go through, no matter how dark your life looks. Hold tightly to him, because he is our home. Just think about this. What would happen if we all took this to heart? Just imagine that for a minute, that the teenagers of Ignite Youth Group, if we had a sense as a group, like, man, Jesus is our home, and we're going to go through stuff, and we're going to have brutal experiences in our life, but man, we're going to hold tightly to him. As we go on this airplane together called life, we're going to hold tightly to him, and we're going to live as if we have this hope that he is our home, that no matter how unsettled we feel, no matter what we go through, we know that he is ultimately going to provide that satisfaction that we're longing for. What would we look like as a community if we all held tightly to that? I think I found an example of what that could look like. And it's a video about Kanye West. If you don't know this about Kanye West, he gave his life to Jesus a couple of years ago. And one of the things he does is he has this massive choir that he flies around the country to do these big presentations or to sing worship at churches. And so I want you to see this video of these people worshiping together. Now, I've included in the link, I didn't want to put in the video because YouTube has been a stickler about shutting stuff down with copyright issues. I don't want to cause copyright issues anyway. So the link is in the description. So when you're done with this lesson, I want you to click on that link and watch those people and just imagine that as a picture and a metaphor for what we could be like going through life together, knowing that we have a hope in Jesus as our final home. And don't stop the lesson yet, because there's one more thing I want you to do afterwards. So watch that video. I hope it gets you encouraged and excited about what we can be as a family together going through life, putting our hope in Jesus. And after you watch this video, this is what I want you to do. I want you to find your favorite worship song, okay? Find it on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, whatever you use. And if you don't have a favorite, songs like So Will I, Reckless Love, How He Loves Us, Oceans, there's a lot of great ones out there you can use. So get a song playing on your computer, playing on your device, and turn off the light in your room. Just find a quiet place, right, where you can listen to music and you can spend a minute with God. And I want you to just ask God, like take some time and ask God, is there anything that you want to teach me about yourself? We've been in a series, God Unfiltered, and this is our last lesson. I want you to end it by taking a moment, spending it with God and saying, God, show me something about yourself. Show me something about yourself that I desperately need to see. And just spend some time with him before we close. So I love you guys. I hope you'll take advantage of this. I'm so happy that you took some time to spend with me, and I cannot wait to be back with you. We're just going to trust God, right? We're going to trust God to get through this together. Have a great Thanksgiving next week. We won't have anything going on. We'll be off that week, and then the week after that, we will see what we're allowed to do. We'll make a plan around that, and we'll find something to get you guys a lesson at least, and maybe more. So again, love you guys, and have a great time watching that video with Kanye and then worshiping and spending time with God.